Hi, thanks for listening in to episode 12 of the Sports Stories podcast. I'm your host, Dave Levine, and once again, I'm delighted you're with me, and I'm excited to hear the fantastic insights, wisdom, and achievements of our guest today. Now, on last week's show, we had Nathan Wood, who is currently lead for the ECB on the specialist and international coaching programs, but was also a professional sports person earlier in his career. Well, today's special guest is Rachael Mackenzie, also a professional athlete. Rachael is the world Thai boxing champion after only starting the sport when at university. She has competed at traditional bare-knuckle Thai boxing. She has also overcome many challenges and prejudices within her career, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about. I know this will be an amazing conversation with Rachael, touching on eating disorders, mindset, knocking people out, preparation for performance, and being a parent. There is so much to cover, so let me introduce today's special guest, world Thai boxing champion, mother, and now a Neuro Physiotherapist, Rachael Mackenzie. Rachael, it's great to have you with me on the Sports Stories podcast. Thanks for giving up your time today. I'm really conscious that it's probably been about 15 years or so since we last spoke, although I know that we live quite close to each other, and I've followed your journey and a lot of the work that you've been doing, and I'm obviously very keen to hear a bit more about your earliest story. Given I know how impactful it was when I first heard it, and I know that you continue to use your story to share, inspire, motivate, and just encourage people to have a really purposeful, meaningful life. So instead of me giving too much more away of what I know about you, can you give us a bit of an insight into who you are, and include your first memory of sport?
Well, I suppose the headline that, got me on the podcast really is my success as an athlete, isn't it? So I'm a world champion in Thai boxing. I'm British boxing champion. Have been fortunate enough to represent my country in both of those sports, and continue to play sport and challenge myself in different sports. But sport really has always been a big part of who I am. As a youngster at primary school, I think my PE teacher was probably the most influential person in the whole of my life at that time, really. He was a male, newly qualified PE teacher who was really passionate about girls being allowed to do everything. So, obviously I'm 40 now, and in those earlier days, sport for girls was very different. It looked very different. We ran around in our PE knickers playing netball, and Mr. Gilgrass was really, really interested in letting us do the things that the boys were doing. So we played rugby. We had no other schools to play against because no other girls in the region were playing rugby. We played cricket. But it was that lesson at the very beginning of my sporting journey that was about girls being empowered to do anything. Unfortunately, my high school experience of PE wasn't so great. And actually, by the time I was 16, I'd stopped playing sport at all.
Wow, 16 you stopped.
Yeah.
How come? What happened there?
Well, I think that experience probably resonates with lots of girls. So sport that was offered didn't make me feel comfortable about myself. I had an eating disorder that meant that I was really conscious about moving and being exposed and failing. But I just didn't feel connected to any of the sports that were on offer, and sport wasn't encouraged or pushed. And actually my sort of self-destruction at that time kind of took me down a path of, going out, drinking, dancing, doing all of the kind of things that actually really, when you don't feel good about yourself, you do to try and, I suppose, punish yourself in a way, or mask some of that emotion that you don't know where to place. So by the time I went to university, I probably hadn't done any real sport for, maybe 2 or 3 years. And Thai boxing, I found by accident at university at the behest of one of my university colleagues, who essentially forced me to go with it because she didn't want to go on her own.
So how old were you when you first sort of participated in Thai boxing?
Well, we went into the club in my first year at university, so I would have been 18 the first time I ever walked into a gym. And I can still remember the first time I walked into this Thai boxing gym. The gym was opposite where I lived, and I remember it was above a nightclub. It had a white door that was shut all the time, and my friend and I waited till everybody else had gone in and then kind of snuck into this this gym to see what was going on, really. And the coach that was running the gym, it was a very male space. There were no women in there, and the coach was really of the thought that women weren't suitable. This was not a sport for women, and he wouldn't let us join in. Literally shut the door in our face. We weren't allowed to join in. So I think partly out of annoyance and partly because my friend was very forceful, we continued to go just to annoy him. So we'd turn up every day and we'd sit on the bench and we'd just, have a chat, give him the stare, wait for his annoyance to rise, and then we'd go home. And then eventually he let us put some gloves on and train on our own. But, it wasn't a comfortable environment to experience the sport in to begin with. But actually, the very first time that I hit the pads, it was literally like a switch for me. So I put the gloves on, punched the pads, and immediately felt different.
What was that feeling?
Well, I think it was about feeling powerful, about feeling strong. The pad made a noise, my friend's hand went back, and I don't think I'd ever felt that before. And even just that, I think the movement that you get from a sport like boxing, the movements themselves are powerful, and now I've learned a lot about the impact of movement on the body. It's really obvious why you feel different when you exercise and when you exercise in a way that's powerful. But at the time, it was just a feeling that I had, and it was a feeling that drove me to keep wanting to, punch things, really, to go and keep punching the bag, or, to feel that change every day.
I'm curious though about how you managed to stick at it when the door was closed in your face. You weren't very welcomed into that environment. You were probably quite low in your self-esteem, given the journey you'd not been involved in sport. There was a lot of things stacked up against you, and yet you continued to go. You persisted, and you found something that you enjoyed. And I'm just wondering what it is, what was within you that inspired you and kept you there?
Well, to begin with, I was with a friend. And I think when we think about girls' sport, particularly, and when we look at dropout for teenagers, how can we make this a social event? My friend wanted to go. She wanted to get a bit fitter. She'd already done Thai boxing before at her home location. So she kind of knew what she was doing a little bit. So it didn't matter that the coach didn't teach us anything, because she could kind of guide it a bit. And by the time she decided it was too boring and she didn't want to go anymore, I think the progress that I'd made just in terms of being able to control myself physically meant that I'd started to take control of myself more emotionally. And I also felt in a way that it was important for me. I could feel that this was part of my progression in life, my recovery, my progress, that it was the thing that made me different, feel differently, behave differently, be able to cope with life better.
So there's something there about taking back control, isn't there, and finding a direction.
Yes, absolutely. And it wasn't for me. I never set out to be an athlete. I never wrote on a piece of paper, I want to be a champion. I didn't ever have any intention of getting in the ring to fight. What I wanted to do was to feel better, and I wanted to feel stronger. And actually that step into the ring was about taking control. It was about taking control of people saying to me, you can't do it because of who you are, because of what you look like, because you're a girl.
Why a combative sport and a kind of an aggressive sport rather than a hockey or something like that, do you think?
Well, I think probably my experiences of hockey and netball and those traditional sports had been really negative as a teenager. Right. I'd been relatively talented at those sports, but it meant that I was almost pushed out of those sports. So I'd kind of lost the love of that. And I did go to the hockey and the netball trials at the university, but I didn't feel like I was the same as the other girls there. You know, that I didn't feel confident enough to try and break into their social cliques. So actually that individual sport meant that for me, I was able to determine how hard I worked and how much effort I put in, and I wasn't reliant on anybody else. And I don't know, maybe some psychologist would have something to say about the fact that, well, I was in a weight controlled sport, but also that I was in a sport where essentially you're punishing yourself, aren't you? Somebody's punching you in the face. But actually being able to take control of how I responded to somebody hitting me has been a massive part of how well I've been able to take control of my thoughts in all areas of my life.
Wow, there's a real parallel, isn't there? Or there's a principle in terms of, you know, what the sport meant and means to you in terms of your life journey as well. And, you know, and was that a large part around your, you know, you mentioned your eating disorder and actually kind of your recovery from that or through that?
Yeah, definitely in the early part of my career, my weight control, so making weight, was really unhealthy. You know, I would really not consider my nutrition at all. Okay. And I sort of got to a point in my career where it wasn't possible to continue like that if I wanted to progress. That was all right until I was sort of knocking on that British title level. And then I realized that you can't just do one thing well. You have to look at all of those facets of your life. And it's the same for everybody, isn't it? You know, those things are fundamental to an athlete, are really fundamental to everybody's well-being. How well I fuel myself, how well I sleep and recover, you know, and the management that I've got around my emotional control. And that desire to step beyond where I was really made me consider how well I took care of those different facets.
So Rachel, when did you know you were really good at this? You know, you walk into this gym and you're having a little go on your own with your friend. And then obviously there must have come a time when you thought, wow, this, you know, this is, obviously I'm connecting with the sport. I'm actually quite good at this, or...
No, I didn't win any fights for quite a while. I really just wanted to show my coach that it was all right for me to fight. He didn't want me to fight. He didn't think I should fight. Right. And it was really my way of sticking it to him. You know, I'm going to fight anyway. I might be losing all the time, but I'm going to keep fighting. Partly because it wasn't just my coach. It was lots of people around me who didn't think I was a fighter. You know, I don't look like a boxer, whatever a boxer looks like. You know, I don't come from a family where that's this kind of sport people play. You know, I was at university studying to be a physio, the irony being that I'm a head physio now, a neuro physio. So I treat people with head injuries.
I've learned from personal experience.
Yes. People expected things that were different for me, and I didn't want to conform to their expectations. I actually don't think I've ever believed that I was good. You know, I never walk into a gym and expect to be the best in the gym. I always think that I'm on a journey, I'm on a learning journey, and that, you know, there's always people that are going to be better that I can learn from.
Yeah, and I'm picking up the idea of being a bit of a non-conformist here, or breaking the rules, or, you know, fighting against prejudice. Is that a theme that has come through in your career and life?
I think because of that experience, really, I think I'm empathetic to the different challenges that people face. You know, when I work with young people and I look at the start they have in life, it's easy to assume that people should just be able to pull themselves up. You know, you should just be able to, I've worked hard to get where I am, so you should be able to work hard to get where you are. That's not the reality for everybody. The reality is that for lots of people, the barriers that are put in place before they even start mean that they can never climb over them. And, you know, it's difficult to climb over that first hurdle unless you've either seen somebody do it, or there's something that you're, I suppose, running away from. And I think for me, that running away was I was running away from falling into being the kind of person that anorexic teenager was heading towards.
Wow. Again, really thinking about the key principles of what's motivating you, what's driven you in your career, and again, hopefully for a lot of people that are listening in here, is, them thinking about what are they running towards or moving towards, but also what are they moving away from, and I'm hearing there was that kind of tension or that battle early on in your in your life as to actually, am I running away from something or moving away from something, or am I actually motivating and moving towards?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that moving away from where you don't want to be is
Yeah,
made easier when you're moving towards a purpose,
right.
when you're moving towards something that's you feel passionate about, and I felt passionate about changing the stereotype around women. When I started Thai boxing, women competed under different rules to men. And I remember the conversation that a promoter asked my coach and I whether or not we'd be prepared to be the first female fight under the same rules as the men. And up to that point, I'd never realised that I wasn't competing on a level playing field. I hadn't actually processed that information. It hadn't occurred to me that people watching those fights viewed me differently, and not just the audience, but actually the judges and the governing body, that people expected that because I was a female, I wasn't able to compete for the same duration of time, that I wasn't able to, deliver the same amount of contact or cope. I wasn't able to cope with the same stress as my male counterparts. And that, it was a non-conversation really for me. Absolutely. I'm prepared to, we were the first female fight, myself and a Dutch girl, to compete under the same rules as the men. And probably out of all of the things that I've done in my career, that's one of the things that I think I'm most proud of, because after that fight, all the women at the same elite level competed under those same rules.
So you've kind of really leveled the playing field, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, there were already some high-profile female Thai boxers who went before me, who had created for themselves a really superstar persona, even elevated themselves above some of the sort of male fighters, and they were challenging the world of sport and combat sports in a different way, and I was just doing it in a slightly quieter, more subtle way. But I think starting that progress, that move towards that parity, that equality.
Yeah, and I'm picking up on the word you used there about really changing the world. Actually, this is. I'm curious again as to the personal and the intrinsic kind of motivation, or the motivation for you to really change the world here and show that actually there's some parity between men and women's sport here, and actually make a bigger message on a more global scale. And it seems like there was, as you've come through your career, there was a real driving force to make a real big difference. Is that again a fair observation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really passionate about the power of sport. Sport is a great light to shine across all different sections of the way that the world works. It on an individual level, it teaches us about how we manage ourselves and how we can drive goals and change and regulate our daily life. But on a more structural societal level, it really highlights where there is discrepancy, prejudice, difference, and just the inequality across different populations, both in the country and across the world. The opportunity isn't the same for everybody. And I fought out in Thailand and trained with some of the Thais out there, and I see for the women fighting out there, I will never forget, I fought bare-knuckle out in Thailand, and the only way to win a bare-knuckle fight is to knock your opponent out. If you get knocked out, you don't get paid. So there's a big driver to obviously knock your opponent out, because we're professional athletes. But I'll never forget winning. I won the fight. I knocked my Thai opponent out, Thai national champion. I'll never forget the way they dragged her out of the ring. And it was almost, it was the recognition that for the people supporting her in her team, she was essentially just a tool, a vehicle. She was not, they didn't consider her in the same way that I knew my coach considered me, and that really struck me.
Yeah, that you were a commodity being used in a system.
She was a commodity. She was a commodity to them. And I, turned back to my coach, my corner, where if I'd have been the one that had been knocked out, my coach would have been a completely different situation, because he valued me, and he valued me as a person.
Rachel, what's it like knocking somebody out? The sole purpose is that actually that's what you have to do. Because even now in boxing, it's, you don't need to go as far as that, do you, to win? If you had to knock them out to get paid, that must be some driving force. What was that like?
I've knocked a few people out in my career, and I think up until the moment where I knocked them out, I don't have the mindset of I'm going in to fight a person. For me, it is very technical. So I'll visualize before the fight the first movements that I'm going to do. I'll have walked through that fight in my mind in a really technical way. And actually, the moment the fight finishes by knockout, that's probably the first moment of that experience where that person becomes, I suppose, a person to me. And I don't know if that sounds really bizarre or odd, but up until that point, it's very technical. It's very much about managing myself. So if I've taken a punch, managing my response to that in a way that's measured, and in a way that's fitting with how we've trained and prepared for that fight.
You mentioned earlier on about the power of sport, and obviously this is a combative sport. You are there to hurt somebody, arguably, or to win the bout or the fight. But I want to just broaden us out a little in terms of actually the power and the lessons that you picked up and learned from your experience in the sport. Can you share any of those? We've talked before about our passion for the difference that the sport vehicle can make in changing individuals and communities. And, you've alluded to that. I'm just really keen to understand, what have you learned? What have been the greatest takeaways for you?
Mindset is everything. And right. Your conversation with yourself determines your outcome. So if your conversation is around, I'm not good enough, I can't do it, then you set up everything about the way that you approach the situation so that you'll fail. Whatever your language and set up in your mind is, regardless of the situation, everything about you changes based on that self-talk. So my posture changes. So if I'm thinking in my mind, this is going to be an argument, then, I become more aggressive in nature. And it's really about checking what your own talk is. What is it that you're saying to yourself that's guiding your response to every situation? And I think that for me has been the most transformational lesson from sport, because it's shaped the way that I am now able to approach everything else. So I don't approach things where in the past I may, and I'll give you a really simple example. I walk into the school playground, and I think the pre-sport version of me would have felt judged by all the other mothers. So I would have, and I would have anticipated people were talking about me or looking at me or judging the way that I look. And actually, the post-sport version of me is able to check that is still, that's still maybe a little bit of an immediate trigger thought for me, because of my history and the way that, but my post-sport version is able to recognize that is a thought and it's not the truth. And so that changes the way that I approach that situation. So if I let my immediate subconscious negative thought take control, I'd go and hide in a corner and I wouldn't engage, and I'd assume people were making negative assumptions about me. And the version of me that's able to recognize that thought is able to go and engage with people and, make it a positive experience, not just for me, but for them as well.
How did you learn to change that self-talk? And I'm also sat here listening to you, fascinating story about how you've learned to moderate your self-talk. So yeah, how did you learn to do that? And did you learn to do that, or did the sport teach you to do that?
Definitely a bit of both. So I think I was not aware that I had self-talk at all until one particular fight. And it was the first fight I ever won. And it was also the fight where my coaching team decided not to come with me. The fight was in Plymouth. Obviously, we're in Yorkshire, so I went to the fight completely by myself. Well, actually, my sister came with me, but she had no idea about sport and no idea about Thai boxing. And we also had no kit. So we go to the fight and some lovely coach in the changing room has wrapped my hands for me. I had no idea what I was doing, but I go to the ring by myself. And I lose the first round. The first round, I go back to my corner. And usually when you go to your corner, somebody puts a stool down, they're waving a towel in your face, squirting water on you, shouting things at you. So it's just noise, 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 noise. And I was stood there alone, nobody saying anything, the whole room chanting my opponent's name. And what I noticed was the noise in my head was really unhelpful. And I started to hear the conversation in my head. And, you know, I'm hearing people chanting Tammy's name. But what I'm hearing in my head is, this is awful. You're going to lose. This is terrible. You're no good at this. Everybody's right. And I almost just checked myself. I spotted Master A, who became part of my coaching team after this. And he was a really positive advocate of mine. And he just gave me a thumbs up and triggered for me a thought that I have to think differently here. And actually my thought at that time was, all right, I don't care. I don't care if I win. I don't care if I lose. I don't care if everybody's laughing at me. I just need to try. I just need to be brave enough to try. And actually with the second round, I knocked her out. That was my first knockout, my first win. But on the way home, it was a long drive back up from Plymouth. And, you know, my feet at 500 didn't go very fast. So I had a lot of time to think and reflect. And the reflection that I had on the way home there was, this actually is partly my fault. This isn't just about the barriers that are in front of me, the coaching that I'm not getting. This is about the way that I'm stepping into the ring. And I sort of realized that I'd talked myself out of everything. You know, I talked myself out of being good enough because it was a bit of an excuse. If I didn't try, I could come out of the ring and say, well, you didn't try, so it doesn't really matter that you lost. You know, and I never gave myself the opportunity. I was never brave enough to say, come on, you've got this.
It sounds like you were hindering yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and it's probably such a common theme in the work that we do, you know, in the world out there. And I think for me, that's one of the greatest things about how sport can really try and help people kind of get out of their own way and help them inspire and aspire and be optimistic and ambitious for things. And it's just such a great story. It's such a key pivotal moment, it sounds like, for you in your career.
Yeah, I think that sort of self-sabotage is really something that we all need to check in on ourselves, don't we? You know, what is it that you are visioning for your life? What do you imagine your life to be like? And then do the habits that you've got every day conform to that vision? Because if they don't, what fear is it that is stopping you from being brave enough to change those habits? What is it that is holding you back in this moment that's preventing you from becoming that person that you see for yourself? And I think for me, definitely, and I suspect this is the case for lots of people, it's the fear of not being good enough. It's the fear that if I put all these things in place, what if I don't get there?
And how did you take that forward then from that moment, with that potential in the back of your mind, you know, the fear of not being good enough, to actually becoming successful and being able to move forward in a really positive way? How did that transpire?
Well, I gave up trying to be good enough. So I actually stopped caring about the result. So I've never actually, from that moment, I have never put any stall into whether I've won or lost. It's pretty much irrelevant to me. And actually, that's probably partly why I feel slightly embarrassed when people ask me about my sporting success, because the medals, the belts, those accolades, they aren't what has been my success in this journey. What's been my success are the micro goals every day. You know, the being able to see progress in how much weight I can lift, how far I can run, it's being able to see progress in those small changes. And I think removing the need to rush towards a really big goal took away that pressure for me, took away the fear of failing, because if I didn't lift 100 kilos today, then I had another chance of doing it tomorrow. So although my coaching team ultimately helped me plot out a development plan that took me to those successes, actually, my eye wasn't on the ultimate goal. It was on, what am I doing today?
And is that a principle then that you take into your life still now, outside of sport and, with your family and so on, and the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I love that the typical control the controllable adage of sport, isn't it? That really is one of the things that I manage my day by. So what can I control in this moment that will improve the outcome of whatever the situation is? So whether that's in the way that I'm responding to an emotional child, or whether that's in the way that I'm managing the washing up, what can I control in this moment that moves me closer towards a positive outcome? And I think not having big things to consider makes life more manageable, because we're all juggling 50 different things at once, aren't we? But actually that focus and your attention on the small micro controllables means that we make progress more effectively.
Moving you on through your career then, you've kind of shared one of your greatest sort of inspirational successes, a moment which really transformed you on. It's not like me to come towards a negative or a low patch, but can you share an experience where you were really quite in a dark place, but you managed to pull yourself back out using some of those techniques?
So my first cruciate rupture, I was at a point in my career where, Rachael the Thai Boxer was my identity. So I made my living out of going and talking about being Rachael the Thai Boxer. I went around clubs inspiring people to also become Thai boxers. Everything that I did in my day was tied up around that identity. And I went to a club in Leeds, a girls group. I was on behalf of Sport England, there to inspire the girls to take part in martial arts. And the coach decided that I ought to demonstrate a jumping, spinning roundhouse kick, and that one of the girls would hold the pad for me. Unfortunately, as I'm spinning through the air, I, in a millisecond, clock this girl isn't actually holding the pad anywhere near her head. So have, that millisecond to make the decision about knocking her out or pulling the kick, and pull the kick midair, land funnily, rupture my ACL, my PCL, my MCL, the whole shebang, and essentially end my ability to kick or to be kicked through that leg. And I sometimes think about this. It was a choice, a 1 second choice that changed the course of my whole life. And I think that opportunity to experience having everything taken away and then looking at how you rebuild with the knowledge that I'd gained from being a Thai boxer was really important for me. I was a Thai boxing champion by accident. I had no plan, I had no ambition, I had no goal, and had no structure really at the beginning of my career. It was accidental. I was a boxing champion by design. So while I was sitting there, ice on my knee, very fortunately for me, at the same time as I ruptured my cruciate, the governing body for boxing shifted the age limit. So they moved it from 35 to 40, which meant that I suddenly was eligible to box. And I remember sitting with I had an ice cryo cuff and some different stuff on my leg to get rid of the swelling. I got some really good support around rehab. And I wrote on a piece of card in a little envelope, I wrote my goal to box for England. And then on the outside of that card, I wrote may my deeds outrun my words, you know, and that moment, that setting that goal, gave me a real structure and plan and an opportunity to put into place all the things that I talk about, you know, so all of the things that I know are important, but that I hadn't had to put into practice before in something new. So, you know, I think a year after I was able to box, I was a British champion, and I had, you know, I'd reached that goal. I'd been able to box for England. But it was about those small things. So that practicing my mindset, doing my visualization, making sure my daily habits were on point, you know, eat, sleep. If you don't get those right, the rest of your life falls apart, really, doesn't it?
Gosh, and so you were a boxing champion at what age? Sorry.
37.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so I think I may still be the oldest England boxer. I don't think anyone else has boxed for England that has been older than me yet. We'll probably have to fact check that, but I think at the time I was definitely the oldest boxer because the age had just shifted.
Gosh, that's an amazing story, but I guess in terms of also seeing how that horrendous, debilitating injury and how you spun it round in a relatively short period of time as well, I guess, because, you know, you don't recover from those physically very quickly, I guess, but you've also mentally, you've had to work the two in parallel to become successful.
And boxing's a really different sport to Thai boxing. I think that in a non-contact sport, you know, a person who doesn't do contact sport, that they imagine that you can just shift it really easily from one sport to another. But actually I had to change my stance, my movement, all of my strategy. It was essentially like learning a completely new sport. What I had experience of being under pressure, and I had all these strategies in place. But the thing that motivated me most of all around going into boxing was that I wanted my children to see what it meant to set a goal, to put into place processes to do it, and then to achieve it or not achieve it, you know, and to reflect on what you could have done differently in order to get closer. But I also had got used to, in the school playground, having conversations with other mothers who felt like there wasn't an opportunity for them to go out and aspire to their greatness, whatever that was. And I wanted to showcase that it's all right. It's all right to be a mum and still have aspirations and dreams, and actually to go and use the things that you've learned being a mother, and you know, to show your children that you can have dreams and that they can have dreams as well. I wanted that to be a vision for people.
And also to, I mean, I know you did it earlier in your career, but also show yourself actually how you built yourself back up and put those things into play. I think it's just fantastic. And, you know, and I love your modesty in terms of, you know, one of them was by chance and the other one was more by design, because you've actually driven it and controlled it. So, you know, not only being a shining light for yourself, but also for others is kind of shining very light and bright here as we're talking about it. So, Rachel, I'm really conscious also then, you know, you've had a couple of sort of phases in your career, and I'm wondering what the next big challenge is now that you've become a boxing champion. Do you have another big goal?
Well, obviously I've reached the age limit for boxing, so my Olympic dream is out of the window. I started playing hockey again last season. So once I retired from boxing, that actually meant that I could do other sports that with no risk of damaging my hands. So I have managed to be selected for the North of England team, for the Masters team. I might try and get in the England team, the Masters England team. We'll see how I progress in that sport. And, you know, sport for me is goals in sport are really important. I'm a very data-driven person. I like to be able to see progress, but also to have some shape and structure around what I'm doing. So, you know, I'm working towards weightlifting. That's a sport that I can be in control of completely. What I realize, my fundamental human flaw in a team sport, is that I like to control what's happening. So
how do you manage?
I'm slightly frustrated by what I perceive to be different levels of effort. And I recognize that in myself, that that's not a helpful element for team sports. And I'm really working hard on being more empathetic to different people's contribution and where they're approaching the sport.
How do you manage yourself with that? Because there'll be lots of people listening who will be within team environments, whether it be at sort of recreational or elite, where there is a difference in perception. And I just wonder how you're managing yourself.
Yeah, I try and think that I'm not living that person's lived experience. So I don't know how well they slept yesterday. I don't know what their conversation was with their spouse as they left the house. I don't know if their mother's ill. So how they show up on the day is really dependent on all of those other things that are going on in their life. So trying to hold that empathy in it, and I try and do that in every situation, you know, angry drivers, whatever. I'm not living that experience with that person. I don't know what's driven them to feel like that in that moment. I won't say that it's not a challenge. You know, I do sometimes check myself on the pitch going, come on. But it is the approach that I try and take, you know, that approach it with empathy. So then you can support. People don't thrive when they're being shouted down. People aren't able to perform if the voices around them are negative voices, because that then becomes your voice inside, doesn't it? So really trying to check myself and make sure that everything, no matter what my inside is thinking, whatever I'm saying to my teammates is always going to be something that builds them up.
Where does competition sit in all of this for you? Because, you know, you've competed all along, you know, to the top of your various sports, and I'm wondering, you know, is competition really still a driving force for you, or can you settle yet?
No, you don't want to play Monopoly with me. Competition, I think, is because there's an outcome, so you can understand where you are in terms of progress with an outcome. So it's not necessarily about the over, you know, our hockey team at Harrogate last year, our masters team, we got to the national finals, and we lost in the final. And obviously that was really annoying, because I like to win everything. But it was the first time we'd fielded a team. I was organising it. I had no idea about any of the rules. It was just something that I'd seen, and I thought, let's see if I can find enough old people like me to join in a team. And all the way through that, I felt really driven towards winning every game, but I didn't feel disappointed when we lost. So I'd given 100, everything, every little drop of energy that I had in that final, I'd given to the game, as had all my teammates, but I wasn't disappointed by the loss. And I think if you can put competition into perspective, the competition can be a driver to success and to personal success, but what would be perceived as failure isn't then negative or detrimental, not just to your enjoyment, but also to your self-esteem and the way that you're able to progress then through whatever your next phase is. Competition isn't about the result for me. It's about driving motivation.
Yeah, and I picked that up really strongly in terms of actually your journey, isn't it? Right from the day dot when you walked through the front door of the Thai boxing gym, those small steps that you kept talking about, rather than winning competitions, but actually just looking to improve and give it your all was your success, you know, and that's what you've kind of lived off the back of by the sounds of it, you know. And I'm just,
yeah,
it's lovely to see you still using that mantra, but yet actually, you know, striving to want to win, but actually not falling off the edge of the cliff if it didn't all drop into place. Because I'm also sat here thinking, gosh, you've come into another new sport, having not played it much before, put a team together in a veterans and done very, very well. You know, that's pretty successful, isn't it, in many ways, albeit not won the, you know, the final hurdle, but actually done very well with it.
I think that's because I had lots of good team members who had been playing for a long period of time, but also about inspiring belief. You know, we're really lucky at how we got the coach that we've got there. Fletch is brilliant and inspires before every game belief in all of the girls. And I think because I believed we could win, and I was leading from the front, and I was saying, you know, and I was getting everybody together for extra training, and I was leading with that expectation that we'd do well. People expect to do well, and when you expect to do well, you perform better. You know, it's all about that mindset. It goes back to that mindset, doesn't it? And what you expect, what your self-talk is as you walk onto that pitch, or you climb through those ropes, or you sit down in a meeting, or you talk to somebody on a street. Whatever that self-talk that's primed you for that encounter is the way that you'll approach and behave in that situation.
Rachel, this might be a bit of an unfair question, but I'm now wondering, which is more powerful here, the mindset and the psychological stuff, or the physical stuff? Which outweighs the other?
Well, I think if you'd seen me box, you'd probably understand that natural talent is not something that I hold. Probably if you see me do anything. I was trying to do a boxercise session that my friend had sent me on a video the other day, and I have an unbelievable lack of coordination and a total inability to follow even a simple boxing routine. So I definitely don't think that I'm inherently naturally gifted. I think even now people come to our gym and they'll see me on the pads, and unless my coach points out that I'm a champion, they would never imagine that to be the case. I definitely am of the thinking that obviously opportunity is the start of people's progress, and the opportunity to facilities and coaching and competition are really critical. But it is about how you drive yourself. Talent in itself will get you nowhere, will it? Talent needs to be met with both opportunity, but also the will and the desire, and the stickability. No matter how good you are, or no matter your natural talent, at some point you will face a loss or a disappointment or a challenge or a barrier, and it's whether or not you've got that ability to keep climbing when it's not going well. And I think that's really what determines success.
It sounds like when you've hit those sticky patches, you've kind of pulled on all of that experience that you've picked up from it. A really difficult start in life, where you had some big challenges to overcome. And those barriers, you jumped over them or found a way over them, and actually recall and bounce back to those places. Is that a theme of your story? How to lift yourself up, and when you drop down, you lift yourself back up and you keep going and keep going.
It fits really well, doesn't it, with the boxing analogy? I can't tell you how many times people have kicked my legs out from underneath me and literally sat me down on the ring. Or they give me a slide dig in the ribs, some of the bigger boys. But it is that, isn't it? If you sit down and you stay down, then everybody moves on beyond you and the world moves on around you. You have to be moving, and whether that progress is slow or whether that progress is fast, so long as you're brave enough to get back up and go again, you're still moving forwards. And I think that's probably the way that I try and approach everything. You're never successful the first time at anything, are you? It is about your ability to recognize that, understand that, and not be defeated by that first challenge.
With that principle in mind, I'm also really conscious. You've shared your sports journey in terms of the activities that you've been involved in. What about your involvement in the wider sport industry? Because I know you're now transitioning into other areas of business and working with some key organisations like the Youth Sport Trust. So can you just share a little bit how you've used some of those key principles which you've lived by to transition into that world as well?
Well, I'm really passionate, and I derive my energy from having that purpose of changing people's lives. Or not, it's not me changing their lives, it's giving people, whether they're young people or whether they're people in business, it's showing them the tools in order to take control and change their own lives. You can't do it for anybody, but I think those of us that have been in sport and that have lived this experience of failure, of resilience, of taking control of those things that we can every day, I think we understand this at a level, almost at a level where we don't recognize that that's the way that we're managing our lives. And if you haven't had that experience of sport, then actually even something as simple as how do I control my emotion when I'm under pressure becomes something that can prevent a person from, doing well at school, or prevent them from reaching their potential in the workplace. and it's an almost inherent natural part of sport and sporting success, but probably a part of that's missing from that wider social conversation. You know, that those things that athletes do on a daily basis are really the fundamentals of human performance, whatever the environment. So those lifestyle behaviours and those psychological tools really are relevant to you, whether you're a primary school pupil or whether you are heading up, you know, a large corporate.
And I think given the situation that we're in at the moment in the world with the, you know, the pandemic and the big coronavirus, and actually things are changing, I have a real sense that those kind of key attributes and approaches are going to be ever so much more needed as we kind of start re-engaging in a new way of working and being. And actually some people are going to hit some quite hard times, so actually calling on those really key habits of those human performance components that you share is going to be really important, you know. And are you sharing those through some of the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so the work that I do really is about upskilling people around those tools. So whether they're young people or whether they're, you know, business people in business, that the principles are the same, but it's about how we translate that into the language that suits the audience. And you know, we're really relevant here in Sports Stories because story is part of that. And I think you build a connection with people when you're able to share a story and an experience about how something has been useful and relevant to changing your outcome. And when they see that through story and they see the relevance of it through that story, it becomes more relatable and it becomes achievable as well. You know, I'm an ordinary person sharing a story about doing something that not many people have been able to do, but I've only done it by doing the things that everybody is able to do, you know. And whatever your world champion status, whatever that is for you, whether that's, you know, in business or in your A-levels, it's possible for every single person to attain that potential by taking really simple steps, you know, and those steps are the same for us all.
Wow, an amazing story that you've shared for us, Rachel, you know, and thank you, because there's so many little gems in there which I just hope people can grasp onto. And I take very strongly from what you're saying. It's about individuals taking those tools and using them in the best way that suits them to keep moving forward towards their goals. And as you have said a number of times as we've spoken today, I think you can't do it for them, I can't do it for them, but we can definitely help them take certain steps, access certain tools, find little ways, and hopefully that the story that you've shared today will really inspire, enthuse, engage, inform a number of different people. And just before we kind of wrap things up, what I'd like to do is take us to a place which I know many of the listeners really like, is to ask you some sort of quick fire questions and hopefully get a couple of real nuggets which might again add to other people's toolboxes. So I'm going to fire some questions at you. I hope you've got some answers for them, but let's go with the ones that come to mind. So we've not mentioned anything around sort of books that you've referred to, but what sort of books in your career or more recently have really inspired or informed you that would be useful to share with others?
Well, I am an avid reader and there's about 20 books on my bedside table at all times. I think a really actionable book for people is The Miracle Morning, Hal Elrod, that you've probably come across that before, but the steps that they're described in there are a great way to set up your day. So I think that would be my starting point for anybody looking for development on a personal journey, because it's the morning as well. So the whole of your day then is set up in a really positive way. I like the Daily Stoic, I think it's called. Ryan Holiday, I think is the author. It's every day on each date, there's a different thought. So today was really relevant, actually. It was about Plato's view of the world and being able to draw yourself back and look at the universe from a wider perspective, and to understand actually that, you know, no matter how big your house or how many cars you have, when we're looking at you from space, everybody's the same. You know, and when we think about what's happening in the world at the moment and the way that different communities are experiencing the world, I think there's a really important place for us all to be doing that. to look at the privilege that we have and the opportunities that we have that aren't available to everybody. And if we were able to remove ourselves from our own position of comfort, actually we'd probably be able to empathise more with some of the challenges that other people face.
Wow, sounds like a really good book,
yeah,
and also a good starting place for every day, as you say.
Yes, yeah. I like the 4-Hour Work Week, Tim Ferriss book. It made me rethink the way that I manage my time. I think that, it wasn't necessarily relevant to the work that I'm doing or what I'm looking to try and do in the world, but it was really relevant to how I think about the way that I structure my working day. And then the other book that I like, I'm doing a master's in psychology, and I like The Body Keeps the Score. And I think if you consider the way that you approach situations, having an understanding of what's happened at a neurological level, based on your life experiences, will really explain some of your innate response. But I think it's also really relevant as parents that we understand the way that our children experience the world, and that, thinking about the lockdown and the stress, and for some children this will be a real period of trauma, and we need to be conscious of that even for children, my children are in a very privileged position. They have 2 living parents, we have lots of opportunity, access to lots of space, but even for them, they may perceive this as a traumatic event that will shape their central nervous system in a way that we may not observe for many years.
Wow, we could really talk about that for so much more, because I think, and I'm also fascinated in that area, because I think these times are as you say, we don't really know what's really going on, but we have a good empathy, maybe an understanding of the potential of what might be happening. So we could maybe come back to that at some stage.
Yeah.
And the neurological side of things, is also a massive area of interest for me, because I think that's really played a big part. And I'm a strong believer in terms of our story, or our history, and our pathway really informs who we are, both on an emotional level and on a neurological level and on a physical level. So it's we've really touched on big parts here today in terms of the mind and the body links. And I think it's, again, such an intriguing area, but let's not go there for now. We'll
that's another 3-hour podcast. Come back for another.
No, that'll be good. It'll be good. In terms of the world that we're in at the moment, technology is quite big. And do you have a fallback piece of technology or a piece of software which is your guiding light and you wouldn't go anywhere without it?
So I have an Apple Watch that I like. I prefer some of the functionality on my old Garmin watch, but I like my Apple Watch because it measures my heart rate variability through the night. And what's really critical for me is about how well I'm recovering. And when you start to monitor some of the metrics about your physiology, you'll notice yourself, if you might have been in bed for 7 hours, but you still get up and you feel like you're not ready for the day. And then you can track what are the habits that I've done before I got into bed, and actually look at how that's impacted on my readiness to manage myself the following day. So my Apple Watch linked to the Auto Sleep app, which is really useful and gives you a daily readiness score. It's a brilliant indicator of your well-being. And it's also that heart rate variability is a great indicator of how well your autonomic nervous system is functioning. So as an indicator for how well you're coping with stress, that's a useful tool just in looking at, do I need to do something differently? I like MyFitnessPal as well, just because I don't need to track my nutrition in the same way that I did when I was competing as a boxer, but I think for anybody who's looking to improve their nutrition, that's a really useful tool.
Wow. Okay, some couple of real gems there, and some insight behind it, Rachel, into the value that these pieces of software and technology bits bring. Okay, so how do you currently prepare yourself mentally and physically to be the best Rachel can be each day?
Well, sleep is my number one thing. So without good sleep, and that is tied into the habits that you've got in the morning and the habits that you've got at night, but sleep is definitely the key.
And what is good sleep?
Well, sleep is about not just a duration, I mean, I studied the neuroscience of sleep, and when you look at the impact of sleep on the structure and function of your brain, you suddenly become very keyed into how critical it is for our longevity and our healthy longevity. And it's about having that restful sleep. So not just staying in bed for hours, but actually getting into the habit of making sure that your routine gives you restful sleep. And this is really, really critical for children. I mean, it's the one thing that I am, it's the thing that I am most fixed on as a parent, is making sure that my children have not just adequate sleep, but also quality sleep. So we have a rule about no technology upstairs at all for me or them or my husband. Nobody is allowed any technology upstairs. The bedtimes are the same, whether it's summer holidays or school day. We're really looking at how we maximize the usefulness of sleep, because it's critical. If we don't sleep well, it impacts on every single aspect of our life, whether that's our weight management, whether that's our emotional regulation, or whether that's our ability to learn or perform.
Wow. Okay. Great stuff. I'll keep moving us on. Again, we could delve into that. So
I know.
I hope you don't mind moving on, because we need to. If you were to win the lottery tomorrow and have a significant amount of money, how would you spend it?
Well, I don't need anything, so I don't think I'd be buying anything for myself. I have a perfectly comfortable house. I think I would invest it in youth charity. So whether that's Youth Sport Trust or another youth charity, or my own charity, I don't know, but it would be in looking at how we impact on young people. If we look at the rise of adolescent mental health problems and the rise in suicide for young people, and even if we consider how the world will look for them going forwards, the economic impact of this period is going to challenge our young people in a way that I have certainly never experienced. I think we need to skill our children. We need to tool them up in a way that is different to the way that we experience childhood. It would be something really, if it was a lot to Euro Millions win, it'd be something really revolutionary.
Oh, good. I like it. I'm on your page as well. That's the sort of thing I would love to do. So let's hope between us we can win it and invest some good money. Take yourself back. What advice would you give to a teenage version of Rachael? Your story and your experience.
Probably that it's all right to fail. I think that eating disorders are very much driven by that desire to take control, and when you don't feel like you're in control of elements of your life, you take control of the one thing as a young person you are in control of, and that's what food you put in your mouth, and that for me was very much driven by a fear of failure, a fear of being not accepted, a fear of not being good enough, and I think that would be my advice. All right to fail, be brave enough to try.
Yeah, and again, a massively pertinent and relevant message, that, isn't it? It's okay to fail, and it's go ahead and give it a go, try. So I think it's simple words but very powerful meanings. Moving on, last couple of questions, if I may. Which three people have most positively impacted on you and your career?
My great uncle Bernard, he is my number one. He lived in New Zealand, so we used to write each other letters every week. So I wrote to him every week when I was a child, and I only met him maybe 5 or 6 times. But he was a wrestler, and he in the days of giant haystacks and wrestling being on television, he was a proper wrestler. But he was also really forward thinking. So as a young child, maybe 6, 7 years old, he introduced me to yoga, and he introduced me to the thought around that mindset. And although it didn't really have an impact on me until much later on, he planted a seed in me that has been part of my wellness journey. And all of the things that he talked about are now all of the things that are part of public conversation, but were really not part of public conversation 35 years ago. He was really, really powerful for me in terms of just support, positive support. I think that Mr. Gilgrass, my PE teacher, my primary PE teacher, who I've mentioned already, just for that message. You know, he also entered us into a cross-country competition, and he made us go running every day. And he'd come and get us, and in the school holidays, we'd go running with the PE teacher. I don't know if you could do that nowadays, but he would get us, and, you know, a few of us would go run around the streets. But that lesson was all about success requires effort, and the more effort you put in, the more success you're likely to have. So he was really powerful. And then probably, well, definitely my Master A, one of my Thai boxing coaches, just for his unfailing belief. So I met him when I'd already started fighting and I had never won. But he believed at that point, the first time he saw me fight and lose, I think probably because I stood up more times than than most people would in a fight, he believed that success was possible for me. And I think his vision was a bigger vision than I had. He had a vision that he would make me the best in the world, and that's what he set out to do.
Gosh, and it sounds like you believed in him and he believed in you, and it kind of became a good match.
Absolutely.
And my very final question, given the honesty and the openness that you've given about your story and the hopeful impact that we would have, and I know the impact you've had by sharing parts of it already in the work that you do, is a question of whose sports story would you really like to hear and why?
Well, I have heard parts of Steve Brown's story. I don't know if you know Steve Brown. He is on Country File at the moment as a presenter. And I've heard really short snippets of his story. And obviously it's a really traumatic story, the way he acquired his spinal injury. But what I've seen and I've observed, we've delivered at events together where he's been in one room and I've been in another room, and the people coming out of his room are always in tears, but so uplifted, you know, so really that emotional connection. And just to hear that full story of how he moved beyond something that really is inconceivable for most of us to make his life so different to where it was at the time, and actually to turn a really negative experience, and more negative than any experience that I've had, into something that's been so powerful for not just himself, but for lots of people around him.
That is a story we do hear, and sometimes they just feel so far out of reach, but it sounds like he's really lands for people. And as you say, sometimes it really puts some perspective, doesn't it, hearing stories like that? And all of our stories, in some ways, just hearing them puts some perspective on our own lives. And as you say, I really liked your analogy earlier on about kind of going up into space and looking back down on Earth and seeing what is really going on, and actually that we've all should really look back in and count our blessings, because we've actually got a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's got a story, haven't they? And sometimes the story that we're telling ourselves is the thing that's holding us back. And so maybe it's checking in on what that story is. No, and today's a new day. Every day you've got an opportunity to shape what your story becomes. But really it starts with making the decision to change.
Well, Rachel, again, we could open that up and go quite a long way with it, because it's just really meaningful, powerful stuff. And I just want to kind of close us down today by asking if any of the listeners would be interested to make contact with you or find out a little bit more about the work that you're doing in so many different domains. And I know we've often laughed a little bit about the fact we do portfolio things because it really piques our interest. But also, I think there's so much learning from the various domains and opportunities and experiences that you have, and how they can kind of complement and engage with one another. So if anybody was interested in finding out what you're doing and where, how might they be able to make contact?
They can get me through the Work Athlete website, so they'll find me on there, or on all the social media platforms as Rachael Mackenzie or Rach F. Mackenzie. I'm pretty accessible, and you Google me, you probably find me if you Google. But if anybody does want to get in touch or has any questions, you know, my purpose is really about making sure that people have an opportunity to feel good about themselves, to do the things that empower and feel powerful to them. And if I can support anybody in any way, then you know, that really is what drives me.
Well, on that note, I'd really like to thank you, because you've certainly made me feel good today, and I think you've really cemented actually the purpose of the Sports Stories podcast and its intention and purpose, and trying to really make a difference inspire people, enthuse them, engage them, inform them, because I think sport, as we've said along the way, sport really is a vehicle to change, and in times like we're in, sport I think can actually really help people feel good about themselves and bring some happiness and joy back into their lives. And there's no more pertinent time now than today, when the world's beginning to open back up again, and seeing how we've lost and missed sport and actually bringing it back in can probably bring some real positive energy. And Rachel, you've really epitomised that today by sharing your story, your journey, but also some of the real great tips around your positive mindset and the psychology around that, but also some real basic things around making sure you get some really good habits, performance habits, sleep, nutrition, but also your honesty around how that's all sort of fallen out of some of the real big challenges that you faced earlier on. So thank you ever so much for sharing all of that today. And it would be really, really special if we could maybe meet up again and talk about some of those other little doors that we didn't open, because you've got so much to offer, and I think we could really add a load of value. So thank you once again. It's been a real great pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, where do we start unpicking that conversation? So many nuggets of information and inspiration. A couple of themes that jumped out for me were the importance of the mindset you have and how the self-talk can impact on the outcome. This seems to be a common theme throughout most of the elite performers and how they have risen to success, but also overcome adversity and setbacks. Another theme seemed to be the ability to set small, achievable steps that in turn positively supported the direction towards her purpose and goal. I was also blown away with her drive and determination to break stereotypes and prejudices, and to see how having an eating disorder has been used to positively motivate her through her life. It's an amazing story. So with these themes in mind, I'd like to pose the following questions. What are you running away from, and how could you use this positively? Secondly, how are you stepping into your day-to-day life, and what can you control? If you'd value exploring any of these questions further, please feel free to contact me at www.thesummitpartnership.com, where I offer personal and professional coaching support. I'd love to hear from you. And lastly, the usual reminders. There is a new podcast coming out next Monday. Please comment and give feedback at www.sportstories247.com. I'd also really appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts if you've enjoyed and valued the show today, as this helps others find the show and get the same value as you. Which now leaves me only to wish you a great week ahead, and I look forward to having you with me, Dave Levine, next week on the Sports Stories podcast.